The blood-red sunset spilled across the horizon like a mortal wound as Rebecca Adams stood before her husband's fresh grave, her black mourning dress billowing in the harsh New Mexico wind. It was the second time in her 24 years that she had buried a husband in the unforgiving soil of truth or consequences. And if the whispers behind her back were any indication, the townsfolk had already decided she was cursed or worse. Rebecca clutched her 4-year-old son William's hand tightly as the last of the mourners departed, leaving only the howling wind to accompany their grief. Michael Adams had been a good man, kind, hardworking, and loved by many in town, which made his sudden death from pneumonia all the more shocking. 3 weeks was all it took for the illness to claim him, leaving Rebecca a widow once again with a young child and a small homestead she could barely manage alone. "Mama, I'm cold," William whimpered, tugging at her skirt. Rebecca knelt down, pulling him close. "I know, my sweet boy. We'll go home now." Home. The word felt hollow. Michael had built that house with his own hands after they married last year, a fresh start after the death of Rebecca's first husband, James Turner. As they walked away from the cemetery, Rebecca felt the weight of stares from women gathered on the church steps. Their hushed voices carried on the wind. Poor Michael. Barely cold in his grave, and mark my words, she'll be hunting for husband number 3 before summer. 2 husbands dead in 3 years. There's something unnatural about that woman. My Henry says he won't do business with the Adams homestead anymore, says it's bad luck. Rebecca lifted her chin and walked faster, steering William away from the venom disguised as sympathy. Truth or consequences had once been her haven, a place of new beginnings when she arrived as a young bride at 19. Now, at 24, she felt like an outcast in the only home she'd known since leaving her parents' farm in Missouri. The small house came into view. As they crested the hill outside town, a modest 2-room structure with a lean-to kitchen, and a small barn where their milk cow and 2 horses were kept. The late afternoon sun caught on something moving near the barn. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, was stacking firewood by the door. Rebecca tensed, her hand automatically reaching for the small derringer she kept in her pocket since James's death. "William, stay behind me," she whispered, approaching cautiously. The man turned at the sound of their footsteps, and Rebecca recognized him immediately. Hank Irwin, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the county. She'd seen him in town occasionally, but had never spoken to him directly. At around 30, he was known for keeping to himself, running his successful ranch with efficiency and staying out of town gossip. "Mrs. Adams," he said, removing his hat, "my condolences for your loss." "Mr. Irwin," Rebecca nodded stiffly, "may I ask what you're doing on my property?" "Stacking wood, madam. Figured you might need some help with winter coming." His voice was deep but gentle, his blue eyes direct but respectful. "I don't recall asking for your charity," Rebecca said, more sharply than she'd intended. Pride was all she had left, and she wouldn't surrender it easily. Hank replaced his hat, seemingly unbothered by her tone. "Not charity, Mrs. Adams, just being neighborly." He gestured to the nearly empty woodpile. "Michael mentioned last month at the mercantile that he hadn't finished cutting enough for winter. I remembered that when I heard of his passing." Rebecca's eyes stung with unexpected tears. The thought of facing the harsh New Mexico winter without enough firewood had been one of many worries keeping her awake at night. William peeked out from behind her skirts. "You knew my papa," Hank crouched down to the boy's level. "I did. He spoke mighty highly of you, said you were growing strong as a mountain lion." William's face lit up at this, and Rebecca felt her resolve weakening. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Irwin, but I don't want anything in return, Mrs. Adams," Hank interrupted gently. "Just being a good neighbor." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached from the road. Sheriff Thomas Miller rode up, his expression grim beneath his gray mustache. "Rebecca," he greeted her with a curt nod before turning a suspicious eye toward Hank. "Irwin. What brings you out this way?" "Just helping a neighbor, Sheriff," Hank replied easily. The sheriff dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Rebecca, I need a word with you, privately." Rebecca's stomach nodded. "William, go inside and wash up for supper," she instructed. The boy reluctantly obeyed, casting curious glances back at the adults. Once William was inside, Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "There's been talk in town, Rebecca. Folks are concerned." "About what exactly?" she asked, though she already knew. 2 husbands in 3 years. "People are superstitious, and now seeing Irwin here." He trailed off, looking between them. "Are you suggesting something improper, Sheriff?" Hank's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. The sheriff backpedaled slightly. No, just saying appearances matter in a small town." "Rebecca's reputation, my reputation," Rebecca interrupted, anger flaring. "My husband isn't even in the ground one day, and you're here warning me about appearances because a neighbor brought firewood." Sheriff Miller sighed. "The bank's also concerned about your mortgage, Rebecca." "Without Michael, I'll manage my affairs, Sheriff," Rebecca cut him off, "and my reputation is not your concern." The sheriff looked as though he wanted to say more but thought better of it. "Just trying to help, Rebecca. Town's changing, getting more proper. You might want to consider your options." After the sheriff departed, an uncomfortable silence fell between Rebecca and Hank. "I should go," Hank said finally, "but I'll finish with this wood tomorrow if you'll allow it." Rebecca wanted to refuse, to prove to herself and everyone else that she could manage alone. But winter was coming. William needed warmth, and her pride wouldn't keep them alive. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We'd be grateful." Hank nodded, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving Rebecca standing in the yard wondering if she just invited more scandal into her already complicated life. The next morning, Rebecca woke before dawn as usual. She stoked the dying embers in the fireplace, put coffee on to boil, and began mixing dough for biscuits. The routine was comforting, something she could control when everything else felt like it was slipping through her fingers. William still slept soundly in the small room they shared. After James died, Rebecca had moved into town, taking work as a seamstress while William stayed with her during the day. Then she met Michael, a kind widower who needed help with his homestead as much as she needed a fresh start. Their marriage had been one of mutual respect and growing affection, if not the all-consuming passion she'd read about in novels. The knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. The sun was barely up. Who would call at this hour? She opened the door to find Hank Irwin standing there, hat in hand. Behind him, his wagon was loaded with split logs. "Morning, Mrs. Adams. Hope I'm not disturbing you." "You're early, Mr. Irwin," Rebecca observed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Wanted to get this wood stacked before heading to town. Got business at the bank." He hesitated. "I brought some venison too, shot a buck yesterday." Rebecca's instinct was to refuse, but practicality won out. Game had been scarce lately, and meat was expensive. "That's very kind. Would you like coffee? It's just brewed." Hank looked surprised but nodded. "Much obliged." She poured him a cup, and they sat at the small kitchen table. The silence between them was awkward but not entirely uncomfortable. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Irwin?" Rebecca asked finally. Hank considered the question, turning the cup in his hands. "I knew Michael, respected him. Man works hard all his life. Least his family deserves is to stay warm through winter. And that's all," Rebecca pressed. "What else would there be, Mrs. Adams?" The sheriff seemed to think. "Sheriff Miller has too much time for gossip," Hank interrupted. "I don't much care what people say, never have." Rebecca studied him, trying to discern his true motives. In her experience, men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "I'll be plain, Mrs. Adams," Hank continued, meeting her gaze directly. "I saw how folks treated you at the funeral yesterday. It ain't right. This town can be cruel to those who don't fit their notion of proper." Rebecca stiffened. "And what notion is that? That a woman needs a man to survive? That if she buries one husband, she should wear black forever? That if she remarries, she must have been unfaithful?" He shrugged. Small minds in a big territory. Before Rebecca could respond, William came stumbling into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped short when he saw Hank. "You came back," he said, eyes wide. Hank smiled. "Said I would, didn't I? A man's word is his bond." William nodded solemnly, as if this was profound wisdom. "Mama says that too. Your mama's a smart woman," Hank replied, then drained his coffee and stood. "Better get to that wood. Sun's up now." As he worked outside, Rebecca went about her chores, occasionally watching him through the window. His movements were efficient, his broad shoulders easily handling logs that would have taken her considerable effort. William had followed him outside, peppering him with questions that Hank answered with patience. By midday, the woodpile was stacked nearly to the eave of the lean-to, enough to last the winter if they were careful. Rebecca brought out a plate of biscuits and bacon as Hank was loading the tools back into his wagon. "A small thank you," she said, offering the plate. He accepted it with a grateful nod. "Not necessary, but appreciated." "William seems taken with you," Rebecca observed, watching her son attempt to lift Hank's axe nearby. "He's a good boy, strong spirit." Hank's expression softened. "Reminds me of my brother at that age." "You have family nearby," a shadow crossed Hank's face. "Not anymore. Lost my parents to cholera when I was 17. Brother died at Gettysburg." Rebecca felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry, the war took so many." "Been 10 years now," Hank said with a shrug that didn't quite hide his grief. "Your first husband, he served," Rebecca nodded. "James came back different, the things he saw." She trailed off. "He took to drink one night riding home from the saloon." She didn't need to finish. Drunk riding accidents were common enough. They stood in silence for a moment, connected by their losses. "Mr. Irwin, Hank, please." "Hank," she amended. "I appreciate your help today, truly, but I'm concerned about what people might say. This town." She sighed. "They're already talking." Hank's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. It's what small minds do to feel important. It's not that simple. I have William to consider. If people shun us, you planning to stay in truth or consequences, Mrs. Adams?" The question caught her off guard. "Where else would I go?" Hank shrugged. "West is full of places. New towns sprouting up where nobody knows your past or cares who you've buried. Are you suggesting I run away?" "No, madam, just saying you have choices." He picked up his hat. "I should get to town before the bank closes." As he turned to leave, Rebecca found herself reluctant to see him go. "Will you? That is, if you're passing by again." Hank smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I reckon I might be in the area. Would it be all right if I checked on you and the boy?" "That would be fine," Rebecca said, surprised by how much she meant it. Hank tipped his hat and climbed into his wagon. As he drove away, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a small flicker of hope. That flicker dimmed considerably when Rebecca took William to town the following day. She needed supplies, and her sewing work for Mrs. Peterson was due. The moment they stepped into the mercantile, conversations hushed and eyes turned their way. Mr. Grayson, the proprietor, was polite but distant as Rebecca presented her list. "Some of these items will need to be paid for upfront, Mrs. Adams." "I've always settled my accounts at month's end, Mr. Grayson," Rebecca said, confused. Grayson looked uncomfortable. "New policy, I'm afraid, for certain customers." "And I'm one of these certain customers now?" Rebecca asked, keeping her voice level for William's sake. "Times are tight, Mrs. Adams, without Mr. Adams' income." He trailed off, not meeting her eyes. Rebecca swallowed her anger and humiliation. "I understand. I'll take what I can afford today." Her errand to Mrs. Peterson's fine house on the hill proved equally disheartening. The older woman examined Rebecca's sewing work with unusual scrutiny before declaring, "I'm afraid this won't do, Mrs. Adams. The stitching is uneven." Rebecca knew this was untrue. Her needlework was impeccable. "I'd be happy to make any necessary corrections, Mrs. Peterson." "That won't be necessary. I've engaged Mrs. Wilson for my sewing needs from now on." Mrs. Peterson pressed a few coins into Rebecca's hand, less than half what she was owed. "For your trouble." Outside, Rebecca struggled to maintain her composure as she led William back toward the center of town. They passed the church, where Reverend Clark was speaking with several parishioners. He nodded stiffly in Rebecca's direction, but made no move to greet her, though she'd attended services faithfully for years. "Why is everyone being mean, Mama?" William asked, his perceptive young eyes missing nothing. Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Sometimes people don't understand things, and it makes them afraid." "What are they afraid of?" "Change, being different, losing someone they love," Rebecca sighed. "It's complicated, sweet boy." As they approached the sheriff's office, Rebecca noticed a small crowd gathered. In the center stood Hank Irwin, facing off with Thomas Barnes, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the county. "You stay away from the Adams woman, Irwin," Barnes was saying, his voice carrying clearly. "Town's got standards to uphold." "Wasn't aware I needed your permission for my comings and goings, Barnes," Hank replied coolly. Barnes stepped closer. "That woman's got the Black Widow curse, 2 husbands in the ground already." "That woman has a name," Hank's voice was quiet but dangerous. "And she deserves respect," Barnes sneered. "Respect for a woman who barely waits for one man to die before luring in another. My wife says the punch was so fast Rebecca barely saw it happen." One moment Barnes was speaking, the next he was sprawled in the dirt, blood streaming from his nose. Hank stood over him, fists still clenched. "Your wife should mind her own business," Hank said, "and so should you." Sheriff Miller pushed through the crowd. "That's enough, Irwin, I ought to lock you up." "Go ahead," Hank challenged. "But first ask Barnes here if he wants everyone to know he got laid out by a man 10 years his junior." Barnes scrambled to his feet, wiping blood from his face. "This isn't over, Irwin." "Sure feels over from where I'm standing," Hank replied. The crowd began to disperse, and Rebecca tried to hurry William past unnoticed, but Hank spotted them. His expression shifted from anger to concern. "Mrs. Adams," he called, striding toward them. "Let me help you with those packages." "You've helped enough, I think," Rebecca replied, acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. Hank lowered his voice. "Barnes and his kind are all bluster. Don't let them intimidate you." "Easy to say when you're not dependent on their goodwill for your livelihood," Rebecca countered. "Did it occur to you that your actions might make things worse for us?" Hank looked taken aback. "I was defending your honor." "My honor isn't yours to defend, Mr. Irwin, and now the entire town will be certain there's something improper between us." William tugged at Hank's coat. "Are you coming to visit us again? You promised to show me how to whittle." Hank crouched down to the boy's level. "I did promise that, didn't I? But I think I need to ask your mama's permission first." Both turned expectant eyes to Rebecca, who felt trapped between her desire to protect her reputation and her son's obvious attachment to Hank. "Perhaps in a few days," she conceded. "Once the town finds something new to gossip about." Hank's smile was warm. "I look forward to it, Mrs. Adams." As they parted ways, Rebecca couldn't help but notice how the townspeople watched their interaction with undisguised interest. By evening, she knew, the rumors would be flying faster than ever. The next week passed slowly for Rebecca. True to her prediction, the town's treatment of her grew colder. The seamstress work she depended on dried up almost entirely. At church on Sunday, she and William sat alone, a conspicuous empty space surrounding them in the otherwise crowded pews. Reverend Clark's sermon that day seemed pointed. "A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones." Throughout the service, Rebecca held her head high, though she felt the weight of judgment from every side. William, too, was affected. The children who once played with him now kept their distance, coached by wary parents. "Why can't I play with Tommy anymore?" he asked one afternoon, watching longingly as the other children ran and laughed in the schoolyard. Rebecca knelt beside him. "Tommy's mama is confused right now. She'll come around eventually. Because of Mr. Irwin. Tommy said his pa told him Mr. Irwin is sweet on you and that's why nobody likes us anymore." Rebecca felt her cheeks flame. "Mr. Irwin is just being kind, William. Adults sometimes misunderstand kindness." "I like him," William declared simply. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." Rebecca smiled despite her worry. "No, he certainly doesn't." That evening, as Rebecca was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart quickened at the sight of Hank riding up, though she told herself it was merely surprise. "Evening, Mrs. Adams," he greeted, dismounting. "Brought you something." He held out a paper-wrapped package. Rebecca hesitated before accepting it. "You shouldn't have." "Probably not," he agreed with a small smile. "But I did anyway." Inside the package was a beautifully bound book, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. "How did you know?" Rebecca asked, running her fingers over the cover reverently. "Mentioned to the bookseller I was looking for something for a friend who enjoys reading. He recalled you'd admired this one." Rebecca felt a surge of complicated emotions. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply, but it also represented another thread binding them together in the eyes of the town. "Thank you," she said finally. "It's a treasured gift." William came running from the house, excited to see Hank. "Did you bring your knife?" "You promised to teach me whittling." Hank ruffled the boy's hair. "I did indeed. With your mama's permission." Rebecca nodded, and soon William was sitting on the porch steps, tongue between his teeth in concentration as Hank showed him how to safely carve a simple horse from a block of pine. "You're good with him," Rebecca observed, sitting nearby with her mending. "He's easy to be good with," Hank replied. "Smart boy. Reminds me there's still innocent things in this world." "He's had to grow up too fast," Rebecca said softly. "2 fathers gone already. He's got a strong mother." "That counts for a lot." They fell into companionable silence, broken only by William's occasional questions and Hank's patient answers. As the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Rebecca found herself wishing the moment could stretch on indefinitely, this peaceful interlude where judgment and gossip seemed far away. "I should get going," Hank said finally as darkness fell. "Got an early start tomorrow." "Driving cattle to Santa Fe. Will you be gone long?" Rebecca asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. The question revealed too much. "Week, maybe more." Hank's eyes met hers. "Will you be all right?" Rebecca nodded. "We always are." Hank looked like he wanted to say more, but instead crouched down to William. "You keep practicing that whittling, but remember, always cut away from myself," William recited dutifully. "And no rushing." "That's right." Hank handed him the small knife. "This is yours now, your first real tool." William's eyes widened. "Really? For keeps?" "For keeps. Shows I trust you to be responsible." The boy threw his arms around Hank's neck in gratitude. Rebecca watched the interaction with a lump in her throat, seeing how naturally Hank returned the embrace. After William went inside to proudly place his new knife on the shelf, Hank turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Adams, Rebecca, I want to be straight with you about something." Rebecca tensed. "Yes, I've been doing some asking around. The bank's planning to foreclose on this property come November if the mortgage isn't paid." Rebecca's stomach dropped. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it real. "How did you?" "I've got business with the same bank. Overheard some things." Hank looked troubled. "It's not right, pushing you off land that's rightfully yours just because I'm a widow without means," Rebecca finished for him. "It's hardly the first injustice in this world, Mr. Irwin." "Hank," he corrected gently. "And no, it's not the first injustice. But it might be one I can help with." Rebecca stiffened. "I don't accept charity. It wouldn't be charity." Hank removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign he was choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about expanding my operation. This land adjoins mine to the east. Good water access, decent grazing." "Are you offering to buy my home?" Rebecca asked incredulously. "No, madam. I'm offering a partnership. You keep the house and garden plot. I get grazing rights to the rest. We split any profits from the cattle." Rebecca narrowed her eyes. That sounds suspiciously like charity dressed up as business. Hank's expression remained earnest. "It's good land that would benefit my operation, and you'd keep your independence. The town would never accept such an arrangement between an unmarried man and a widow." "The town can go hang," Hank said bluntly. "Pardon my language." Despite everything, Rebecca laughed, a genuine sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. "You really don't care what people think, do you?" "I care what some people think," Hank replied, his gaze intent. "Just not most people." The air between them seemed to thicken. Rebecca was acutely aware of how close they stood, of the deepening night around them. "I need to think about your offer," she said finally. "Of course." Hank replaced his hat. "I'll be back in a week or so, no rush to decide." As he mounted his horse, he looked down at her, his face half shadowed in the dusk. "Rebecca?" "Yes, let them talk. What matters is what's true, not what's said." With that, he rode away, leaving Rebecca standing in her yard, the book clutched to her chest, wondering what truths she was afraid to acknowledge even to herself. The week of Hank's absence passed with excruciating slowness. Rebecca tried to focus on her daily tasks, tending the garden, caring for William, mending clothes for the few clients who still brought her work. but her mind repeatedly drifted to Hank's proposition and what it might mean for her future. On Wednesday, she received an unwelcome visitor. Thomas Barnes, his nose still showing the faint discoloration from Hank's punch, arrived with his foreman in tow. "Mrs. Adams," he greeted her coldly from atop his expensive horse. "I've come with a proposition." Rebecca stood on her porch, arms crossed. "I'm listening." "I'll buy this property for $50, cash money today." Rebecca nearly laughed at the insulting offer. The land was worth at least 5 times that amount. "Not interested, Mr. Barnes." Barnes leaned forward in his saddle. "Bank's going to take it anyway come November." "At least this way you get something." "How do you know about my arrangement with the bank?" Rebecca demanded. Barnes smirked. "Small town, Mrs. Adams. I also know your friend. Irwin has been asking questions about your mortgage. Planning to play the hero, is he?" Rebecca kept her face impassive. "My financial matters are my own concern. Not for long." Barnes straightened up. "Think about my offer. It's more than you'll get when the bank seizes everything." "Good day, Mr. Barnes," Rebecca said firmly, turning to go inside. "Your husbands would be ashamed," Barnes called after her. "A respectable woman doesn't carry on with a man like Irwin before her second husband is cold in his grave." Rebecca whirled around, fury coursing through her. "My husbands would be ashamed of this town and men like you who hide cruelty behind a mask of propriety. Now get off my property before I get my shotgun." Barnes's face darkened, but he signaled to his foreman and they rode away. Rebecca waited until they were out of sight before letting her shoulders slump. Barnes was a dangerous enemy to make, but she wouldn't be bullied, especially not by a man who clearly wanted her land for his own purposes. The encounter left her shaken, however. If Barnes knew about her financial situation and Hank's interest in helping, what else was being said? The thought of William facing more ostracism because of rumors about her, and Hank made her stomach twist with worry. On Saturday, Rebecca took William to town for necessary supplies. The stares and whispers seemed to have intensified in the wake of Barnes's visit. At the mercantile, Mrs. Grayson was coolly polite as she filled Rebecca's modest order. "Will that be all, Mrs. Adams?" "Yes, thank you," Rebecca replied, counting out her dwindling coins, as Mrs. Grayson wrapped the purchases. She cleared her throat. "I feel I should mention, as one Christian woman to another, that people are always talking, Mrs. Grayson, about you and that Irwin fellow." Mrs. Grayson lowered her voice. "It's not proper, a widow entertaining a man so soon after burial, and him with his reputation." Rebecca stiffened. "What reputation might that be?" "Well, he keeps to himself, doesn't he? Never married at his age. Some say he left trouble behind him in Texas." "Some say a great many things without evidence," Rebecca replied evenly. Mrs. Grayson sniffed. "Just trying to be helpful, dear. A woman alone must be careful of appearances." "A woman alone must be careful of many things, Mrs. Grayson, chief among them who she trusts with her good name." Rebecca gathered her purchases. "Good day." Outside, William tugged at her hand. "Mama, look, it's Mr. Irwin." Rebecca's heart leaped as she followed William's pointing finger. Sure enough, Hank was riding down the main street, dusty from the trail. He spotted them at the same moment, his weary expression brightening instantly. "William, Mrs. Adams," he called, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "Just got back from Santa Fe." William ran to him excitedly. "Did you bring me anything?" "William," Rebecca scolded. "That's not polite," Hank chuckled. "As a matter of fact, I might have something." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden figure, a perfectly carved horse. "Found this at the trading post. Reminded me of a certain young man who's learning to whittle." William accepted the gift with reverent hands. "It's better than anything I could make. For now," Hank said, "but keep practicing and you'll make even finer things." Rebecca watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Hank's kindness to William touched her deeply, but she was also acutely aware of the townsfolk observing their reunion with undisguised interest. "We should be getting home," she said quietly. Hank nodded, understanding her discomfort. "May I escort you? I'm headed that direction anyway." Rebecca hesitated, but William was already tugging at Hank's sleeve, asking questions about Santa Fe. She nodded her acquiescence. As they walked toward the edge of town, Hank leading his horse beside them, Rebecca noticed Mrs. Peterson and several other society ladies watching from the millinery shop window, their disapproving expressions clear even at a distance. "Town seems unusually interested in our conversation," Hank observed dryly. "Barnes came to see me while you were gone," Rebecca said in a low voice. "Offered to buy my land, for almost nothing." Hank's jaw tightened. "Barnes has been trying to expand west for years. Your property would connect two pieces of his holdings. He also mentioned you'd been asking about my mortgage. I'm sorry if that caused you trouble," Hank said. "I wanted to understand exactly what you're facing." They had reached the outskirts of town. William ran ahead, playing with his new wooden horse. "And what am I facing in your assessment?" Rebecca asked. Hank sighed. "Barnes has the bank president's ear. They've likely already agreed to sell your land to him after foreclosure. So my choices are to sell to Barnes now for a pittance or lose everything in November. Or accept my offer," Hank said quietly. "I meant what I said about a partnership." Rebecca stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Why are you doing this, Hank? Truly?" Hank met her gaze steadily. "At first, it was because Michael was a good man who deserved better than to have his family thrown off their land. Then it was because I saw how this town treated you like you'd done something wrong by simply trying to survive. And now," Rebecca pressed, Hank's eyes softened. "Now it's because I can't stop thinking about you, about William, about the way you hold your head high despite everything. About how you deserve so much better than what life's handed you." The honesty in his voice made Rebecca's breath catch. "People will say I've ensnared you somehow, that I'm improper." "Let them talk," Hank said with surprising intensity. "Rebecca, I don't give a damn what this town thinks of me. Or of us. The word hung between them, full of possibility and danger. "I need time," Rebecca said finally, "to think, to be sure." "Of course," Hank replied. "I'd never rush you." They continued walking toward Rebecca's homestead in companionable silence, William darting ahead and returning periodically to show them some treasure he'd discovered along the way. As they approached her property, Rebecca noticed something wrong immediately. The front door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. "I never leave the door unlocked," she said, alarm rising in her throat. Hank's posture changed instantly, alert and protective. "William, stay with your mother," he instructed, then moved swiftly toward the house. Rebecca gathered William close, heart pounding as she watched Hank disappear inside. Moments later he emerged, his expression grim. "Someone's been through your things," he reported. "Nothing obviously missing, but they made a mess." Rebecca hurried inside, gasping at the sight. Her few possessions were scattered across the floor, drawers emptied, the mattress slashed. Most disturbing of all, scratched into the wooden table were the words, "Leave or else." "Who would do this?" she whispered, though she already suspected. "Barnes," Hank growled, "or someone working for him." William clung to Rebecca's skirts, his eyes wide with fear. "Mama, why did someone break our things?" Rebecca knelt beside him, forcing calm into her voice. "Some people do mean things when they're angry or afraid, but we're going to be fine." Hank surveyed the damage. "You can't stay here tonight, it's not safe." "We have nowhere else to go," Rebecca said, the reality of their situation hitting her fully. Hank hesitated only briefly. "You'll come to my ranch. I have plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Diaz, is there. Everything will be proper." Rebecca wanted to refuse, to insist they would be fine, but looking at William's frightened face, she knew she couldn't risk staying. "Just for tonight," she agreed reluctantly. They gathered what they needed quickly: clothes, William's treasured wooden horse, Rebecca's sewing basket. As they rode toward Hank's ranch, William seated in front of Hank while Rebecca rode the second horse. She felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear for what the future held, but relief at not facing it alone. Hank's ranch was larger than Rebecca had imagined, a sprawling main house, bunkhouse for the hands, several outbuildings and corrals filled with cattle and horses. It spoke of prosperity earned through hard work. Mrs. Diaz, a matronly Mexican woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, welcomed them warmly. "Mr. Irwin sent word ahead," she explained, showing them to a comfortable guest room. "Dinner will be ready soon. The boy looks hungry." Once they were settled, Hank knocked on their door. "I'm riding into town to speak with the sheriff," he informed Rebecca. This vandalism can't go unpunished. Sheriff Miller won't do anything, Rebecca said wearily. He's in Barnes's pocket like everyone else. Maybe, but it needs to be reported officially. Hank's expression was determined. I'll be back for dinner. Mrs. Diaz will take good care of you. After he left, Rebecca helped William wash up, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the upheaval. Mrs. Diaz brought warm water and fresh towels, her motherly presence comforting. Mr. Irwin is a good man, Mrs. Diaz said as she showed Rebecca where extra blankets were kept. I have worked for him 5 years. He is fair, honest. You don't think it's improper for us to be here? Rebecca couldn't help asking. Mrs. Diaz snorted. Improper is how that town treats a widow with a child. Mr. Irwin, he speaks of you often. With respect, he does. Rebecca felt a flush creep into her cheeks. He says you are strong, like the oak that bends in the wind but does not break. Mrs. Diaz gave her a knowing look. A man does not speak so of a woman who is merely a neighbor. Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond to this insight, but was saved by William's return from washing up. I'm hungry, Mama. Dinner soon, Mrs. Diaz promised. Come, help me set the table, young man. William followed eagerly, always happy to be useful. Left alone, Rebecca moved to the window, looking out over Hank's property in the gathering dusk. It was beautiful, peaceful in a way truth or consequences hadn't felt in a long time. Hank returned as they were sitting down to dinner, his expression thunderous. Sheriff Miller says there's nothing he can do without proof, he reported, taking his seat at the head of the table. Claims it could have been drifters passing through. Drifters who knew exactly where to find us and had a grudge, Rebecca asked skeptically, Hank's mouth set in a grim line. Exactly what I said. He didn't appreciate the suggestion that Barnes might be involved. The conversation shifted to lighter topics for William's benefit as they enjoyed Mrs. Diaz's excellent cooking. The boy was clearly fascinated by everything about the ranch, asking endless questions that Hank answered patiently. After dinner, Mrs. Diaz took William to the kitchen to help with dessert, leaving Hank and Rebecca alone at the table. What happens now? Rebecca asked quietly. Hank leaned forward. You stay here tonight where it's safe. Tomorrow we can talk about longer-term solutions. I can't impose, it's not an imposition, Hank interrupted gently. Rebecca, I want to help, not out of pity or charity, but because. He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. Because in the short time I've known you, you've come to mean a great deal to me, you and William both. Rebecca felt her heart quicken. Hank, the sound of William's laughter from the kitchen interrupted whatever she might have said. Perhaps it was for the best. Her emotions were too raw, too confused by the day's events to trust. We should join them for dessert, she said instead. Hank nodded, though something in his eyes told her he understood what remained unspoken between them. Later, after William had fallen asleep in the guest room, Rebecca found herself unable to rest. She slipped out onto the porch, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. Hank was already there, smoking a cigarette and gazing at the star-filled sky. Can't sleep? He asked, not seeming surprised by her appearance. Too much thinking, Rebecca admitted, joining him at the porch railing. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the vastness of the New Mexico night spread before them. My offer still stands, Hank said finally. The partnership. But there's something else I want to propose as well. Rebecca turned to look at him, his face half illuminated by the moonlight. What's that? Hank extinguished his cigarette and turned to face her fully. Marry me, Rebecca. The directness of it took her breath away. Hank, hear me out, he continued. I'm not asking out of pity or convenience. I'm asking because when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time, maybe ever. We barely know each other, Rebecca protested weakly. I know you're brave, I know you're loyal. I know you love your son more than anything in this world. Hank stepped closer. I know you're the kind of woman a man would be proud to build a life with. Rebecca felt tears threatening. People will say terrible things, that I bewitched you somehow. That I let them talk, Hank said fiercely, taking her hands in his. You're mine now, or you could be if you'll have me. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her, but instead, it sent a thrill through her body. To belong to someone again, to be cherished and protected, the yearning for it nearly overwhelmed her. William needs time to know you better. she said, clinging to practicality. Of course, we could have a long engagement. And my land will be protected. We'll fight Barnes together. Rebecca searched his face, looking for any hint of deception or hidden motive, but found only earnestness and something deeper, a longing that matched her own. I'm afraid, she confessed in a whisper. Hank's hand came up to gently cup her cheek. Of what? Of hoping again, of losing again. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, Hank said solemnly, but I can promise to face whatever comes standing beside you. In that moment, with the stars witnessing overhead, Rebecca made her decision. Yes, she said simply. Hank's smile was radiant as he drew her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Rebecca felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. We'll tell William tomorrow, Hank asked. Rebecca nodded. Tomorrow. As they stood together on the porch, Rebecca knew there would be battles ahead with Barnes, with the bank, with the town's prejudice. But for the first time in too long, she didn't feel as though she faced those battles alone. When Rebecca and William returned to their homestead the next day, accompanied by Hank and 2 of his ranch hands, they found the damage had worsened. Someone had broken windows overnight and scrawled more threats on the walls. This settles it, Hank said grimly. You're staying at the ranch until we sort this out. Rebecca wanted to argue but knew he was right. William's safety had to come first. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a new routine. Rebecca helped Mrs. Diaz with household management, her efficient organization quickly earning the older woman's respect. William thrived in the ranch environment, following Hank around like a shadow, soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and the land. News of their engagement spread through Truth or Consequences like wildfire. The reactions were predictably mixed. Some, like Mrs. Diaz and Hank's ranch hands, offered genuine congratulations. Others, particularly in town, were openly scandalized. Reverend Clark paid them a visit, his expression grave as he accepted Mrs. Diaz's offer of coffee. Mrs. Adams, Mr. Irwin, he began solemnly. I've come to express my concern over recent developments. Our engagement, you mean, Hank said bluntly. The Reverend nodded. The timing is unfortunate. Barely a month since Michael's passing. People are talking. People always talk, Reverend, Rebecca replied, but God knows what's in our hearts. Indeed. Reverend Clark looked uncomfortable. However, appearances matter in a Christian community. Your rapid remarriage raises questions about the nature of your relationship before Michael's death. Hank's hand clenched around his coffee cup. That's a serious implication, Reverend. I'm merely conveying the community's concerns. The community had little concern for Mrs. Adams when she was struggling to keep her home and feed her son, Hank pointed out. Their sudden interest in her welfare seems selective. Reverend Clark shifted in his seat. Mr. Irwin, your reputation, my reputation, Hank interrupted. Please enlighten me about my reputation. The Reverend cleared his throat. There are stories from your time in Texas, violent altercations. You mean when I defended myself against cattle thieves? Hank's voice remained level, but Rebecca could sense his growing anger. Or perhaps you're referring to the time I stopped 3 men from assaulting a young Apache woman outside Fort Davis, which violent altercation concerns the good people of Truth or Consequences. Reverend Clark had the grace to look abashed. Rumors often distort the truth. Indeed they do, Rebecca interjected. Which is why we put our faith in God's judgment, not man's. Isn't that what you teach every Sunday, Reverend? The minister's visit ended shortly thereafter, with his reluctant agreement to announce their engagement from the pulpit, though his disapproval remained evident. After he left, Hank pulled Rebecca close. I'm sorry you have to face this. Rebecca leaned into his embrace. I'm not. What we have is worth it. The confrontation with Barnes came sooner than expected. Rebecca was in town with Mrs. Diaz, selecting fabric for her wedding dress, when Barnes cornered her outside the dressmaker's shop. Heard you're marrying Irwin, he said without preamble. Smart move, securing your position before he realizes what he's getting into. Rebecca straightened her spine. Mr. Barnes, I have nothing to say to you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. That land should be mine, still could be for the right price. The land isn't for sale, Rebecca replied firmly. Not to you, not to anyone. Barnes's expression darkened. Don't be a fool, woman. Irwin can't protect you forever. Is that a threat, Mr. Barnes? Mrs. Diaz demanded, coming to stand beside Rebecca. Barnes stepped back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just friendly advice between neighbors. Good day, ladies. As he walked away, Mrs. Diaz muttered something in Spanish that made Rebecca suspect it wasn't a blessing. That man is trouble, Mrs. Diaz warned. Mr. Hank must be told. When they reported the encounter to Hank that evening, his expression grew stonier with each word. Barnes is getting desperate, he observed. The bank's board meets next week to discuss foreclosures. Once we're married, your property becomes joint ownership. Barnes knows his plan is falling apart. What if he tries something worse than threats? Rebecca worried. Hank's jaw set determinedly. Then he'll learn why those stories from Texas aren't entirely exaggerated. The next day, Hank rode to the county seat to file paperwork that would officially register their upcoming marriage and begin the process of joining their properties legally. While he was gone, Rebecca worked with Mrs. Diaz on wedding preparations. Despite the circumstances, Rebecca found herself genuinely excited about the wedding. Their plan was simple: a small ceremony at the ranch with Reverend Clark officiating, followed by a modest celebration with the ranch hands and a few friends. William, perhaps most excited of all, practiced his role as ring-bearer diligently, solemnly walking the length of the main room with a pillow carrying Hank's mother's ring, a simple gold band with a small emerald that Hank had kept safe all these years. Will Mr. Hank be my pa after the wedding? William asked as Rebecca tucked him into bed that night. The question made Rebecca's heart swell. Would you like that? William nodded enthusiastically. He knows everything, Mama, about horses and cattle and how to make a fire without matches. And he never gets angry when I ask too many questions. Rebecca smoothed his hair back. He cares about you very much. I think he loves you, Mama, William said with a child's directness. He looks at you like the princes look at princesses in my storybooks. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. Does he now? And you look at him the same way, even when you think nobody's watching. Out of the mouths of babes, Rebecca thought, amazed at her son's perceptiveness. You're a very smart boy, William Adams. William Irwin, he corrected solemnly. That'll be my name soon, right? Yes, Rebecca agreed, feeling a surge of happiness at the thought. William Irwin. Hank returned the following day with unexpected news. The bank president wants to meet with us, he reported. Tomorrow morning. Rebecca frowned. Why? The foreclosure isn't scheduled until November. He wouldn't say specifically, but I got the impression Barnes has been making waves. The next morning, they rode into town together, leaving William in Mrs. Diaz's capable care. The bank president, Mr. Harrington, was a portly man with calculating eyes that assessed Rebecca coolly as they entered his office. Mrs. Adams, Mr. Irwin, thank you for coming. He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. I'll get right to the point. Your mortgage, Mrs. Adams, is significantly in arrears. As I'm well aware, Rebecca replied, but payment isn't due until November. Harrington cleared his throat. There's a clause in the contract allowing the bank to demand immediate payment if we believe the property is being mismanaged. Hank repeated sharply, that land is in better condition than most in the county. Nevertheless, we've received reports of vandalism, broken windows, property damage. Harrington smiled thinly. Suggests a certain lack of proper oversight. Rebecca felt anger rising. Damage caused by whoever's been threatening me to leave, likely at Mr. Barnes's instigation. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Adams. Harrington's voice held a warning. Mr. Barnes is a respected businessman in this community. What exactly are you proposing? Hank interjected, his tone deceptively calm. Harrington straightened a stack of papers on his desk. The bank is prepared to forgive the remaining mortgage if Mrs. Adams will sign over the deed to Mr. Barnes. He's generously offered $75 in addition. That's barely more than his original insulting offer, Rebecca said indignantly. It's the best you'll get, Harrington replied. Unless you can pay the full mortgage amount $300 by the end of the month. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. There was no way they could raise that amount so quickly. And if we refuse, Hank asked, then the bank will take possession immediately, citing the mismanagement clause. You'll have 1 week to vacate. Rebecca and Hank exchanged glances. This was worse than they'd anticipated. We need time to consider, Rebecca said finally. Harrington nodded. You have until Friday, 3 days. After that, the offer is withdrawn. Outside the bank, Rebecca struggled to maintain her composure. They can't do this. It's not legal. It might be if that clause exists in the fine print, Hank said grimly. Barnes has clearly gotten to Harrington, made him an offer too good to refuse. What do we do now? Rebecca asked, feeling the weight of impending loss. Hank took her hand firmly in his. We get married. Today. Rebecca blinked in surprise. Today, but the preparations can wait. What's important is that we're legally bound before Barnes and Harrington can make another move. Once we're married, your property becomes part of our joint assets. It complicates their plan. Rebecca considered this. The practical side of her saw the wisdom in Hank's suggestion, and the part of her that had grown to love him over these weeks didn't want to wait either. William will be disappointed to miss being ring-bearer, she said, her last token resistance. Hank smiled. We'll have a proper celebration later, but right now we need to protect what's yours. They found Judge Peterson in his office, initially reluctant to perform the ceremony without proper notice. It's highly irregular, he protested. So is the bank's attempt to seize Mrs. Adams's property before the due date, Hank countered. We need legal protection, Judge, today. Whether it was Hank's persuasiveness or the judge's own sense of fairness prevailing over town gossip, he eventually agreed. I can do it at 4 o'clock. You'll need witnesses. They managed to find two surprisingly, Mrs. Grayson from the Mercantile, who had softened toward Rebecca after hearing about the vandalism, and Mr. Collins, the blacksmith who had always dealt fairly with Rebecca even when others shunned her. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Standing before the judge in her best dress, not the wedding gown she'd been planning, but a serviceable blue that Hank said matched her eyes, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness that transcended the hasty circumstances. I, Hank Irwin, take thee, Rebecca Adams, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Hank recited, his eyes never leaving hers. The traditional words took on new depth as he spoke them, his voice steady and sure. When Rebecca repeated her own vows, she was surprised to find tears in her eyes. This wasn't how she'd imagined her wedding day, but the emotion binding her to Hank was real, forged in adversity, but growing into something precious. Judge Peterson pronounced them husband and wife with little ceremony. Hank's kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience but promising more when they were alone. Congratulations, Mrs. Grayson said afterward, somewhat stiffly but seemingly sincere. I hope you'll be very happy. Thank you for standing with us, Rebecca replied, genuinely grateful for the woman's unexpected support. News of their marriage spread through town almost instantly. They could feel eyes on them as they left the judge's office, some curious, some disapproving, some simply surprised by the suddenness. Mrs. Irwin, Hank said softly as he helped her into the wagon. How does it feel? Rebecca smiled, savoring the new name. Strange, but right. When they returned to the ranch, William was initially disappointed about missing the ceremony, but quickly rallied when Hank promised they would still have the celebration they'd planned, where William would have his important role. So you're my pa now? He asked Hank directly. Hank crouched to the boy's level. I am, if you'll have me. I can't replace your father who died, but I promise to love you and teach you everything I know. William considered this solemnly before throwing his arms around Hank's neck. I'd like that. That night, after William was asleep, Rebecca and Hank found themselves truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. Despite the practical reasons that had accelerated their wedding, there was nothing practical about the way Hank looked at her as she entered their bedroom, her hair loose around her shoulders. You are so beautiful, he said simply. Rebecca felt a blush rise to her cheeks. This isn't how I imagined our wedding night. Hank moved closer, taking her hands in his. Are you disappointed? No, she answered honestly. Just nervous. We don't have to rush anything, Hank assured her. We have time. But as he spoke, his thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. Rebecca realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want to wait. These past weeks had built a connection between them that went beyond practical considerations or physical attraction. She trusted this man, not just with her property or her son's future, but with her heart. "I don't want to wait," she whispered, stepping into his embrace. Their first night together as husband and wife was a revelation for Rebecca. Michael had been kind but reserved. James, damaged by war and drink, had often been rough. Hank was different, attentive, gentle yet passionate, focused entirely on her pleasure. In his arms, Rebecca discovered parts of herself she hadn't known existed, a capacity for joy that transcended the hardships of her past. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Rebecca felt a contentment she'd nearly forgotten was possible. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked, her head resting on his chest. Hank's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Tomorrow we file our marriage certificate with the county clerk. Then we inform the bank that any proceedings against your property now involve me as well. Will it be enough?" "It complicates things for them. Barnes wants clean title, not a legal battle with me." Rebecca propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Barnes isn't the type to give up easily. Neither am I." Hank's expression was determined, "especially not when I'm fighting for what matters." His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Rebecca turned her face to kiss his palm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Don't thank me for loving you," Hank replied softly. "It's the easiest thing I've ever done." The next morning, they rode into town together, the marriage certificate safely tucked in Hank's pocket. William stayed at the ranch again, excitedly helping Mrs. Diaz prepare a special dinner to celebrate the wedding. At the county clerk's office, they filed the necessary paperwork to make their union official in all legal respects. Hank also filed documents establishing joint ownership of Rebecca's homestead, effectively tying it to his much larger property. Their next stop was the bank, where Mr. Harrington's expression soured visibly when they presented the marriage certificate and ownership papers. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "The mismanagement clause will be difficult to enforce now that the property is legally part of the Irwin Ranch," Hank interrupted smoothly. "My attorney in Santa Fe would be very interested in reviewing that clause, especially given the suspicious timing of its invocation." Harrington's face reddened. "Are you threatening legal action, Irwin? I'm suggesting that pursuing this matter might prove more costly than the bank anticipates, both financially and in terms of reputation." Hank's tone remained pleasant, but Rebecca could hear the steel beneath. A bank that seizes property from a widow correction, a newly married woman based on vandalism likely perpetrated by the very man attempting to buy said property. The territorial newspapers would find that quite interesting. The bank president's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Honor the original terms of Mrs. Irwin's mortgage. Payment due in November, as agreed. In return, we won't inquire too deeply into the bank's relationship with Mr. Barnes." Rebecca watched the silent battle of wills, impressed by Hank's calm confidence. Finally, Harrington nodded reluctantly. "The original terms stand, but the payment must be made in full on time." "It will be," Hank assured him. Outside the bank, Rebecca released the breath she'd been holding. "That was impressive," Hank smiled, taking her hand. "Banking is about confidence. Show weakness and they'll devour you. Show strength and they suddenly find room to negotiate." Their victory was short-lived. As they walked toward the mercantile to purchase supplies, Thomas Barnes stepped out of the saloon, blocking their path. Two of his ranch hands flanked him, their postures suggesting trouble. "Heard congratulations are in order," Barnes said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite the convenient timing." "Thank you," Rebecca replied coolly. "If you'll excuse us, not so fast." Barnes moved closer. "You think you've won, don't you? Got the bank to back down, secured the property, but this isn't over." Hank stepped slightly forward, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Sounds like a threat, Barnes. Take it however you want." Barnes looked between them. "That land should have been mine. You've made an enemy today, both of you." "Wouldn't be the first time someone didn't like me," Hank replied evenly. "Now step aside. My wife and I have business to attend to." The emphasis on wife wasn't subtle. Barnes's face darkened with anger, but after a tense moment he moved aside. "This isn't finished, Irwin." "I believe it is," Hank countered. "Unless you want to continue this conversation more privately." The implied challenge hung in the air. Barnes might have wealth and influence, but Hank's reputation as a formidable opponent was well established. After a moment, Barnes jerked his head to his men and they retreated toward the saloon. "Are you all right?" Hank asked Rebecca as they continued walking. She nodded, though her heart was racing. Will he really let it go, eventually? Hank squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Men like Barnes care about their pride, but they care about their hides more. He'll bluster and threaten, but I doubt he'll risk open confrontation." The rest of their errands passed without incident, though Rebecca was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them through town. Some, like Mrs. Grayson, offered cautious congratulations. Others pretended not to see them at all. Reverend Clark approached as they were loading their purchases into the wagon. "I understand congratulations are in order," he said stiffly. "Thank you, Reverend," Rebecca replied. "I wish you'd consulted me before taking such a step. A church wedding would have been our preference," Hank interjected smoothly. "Unfortunately, circumstances required immediate action. We still plan to have a proper celebration. You'd be welcome to offer a blessing." The olive branch seemed to mollify the reverend somewhat. "I see. Well, what's done is done. I pray your union is blessed despite its unconventional beginnings." As they rode back to the ranch, Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. There would still be challenges ahead: Barnes's enmity, the mortgage payment in November, the town's lingering judgment, but they would face them together. "Happy?" Hank asked, noticing her expression. Rebecca smiled, surprising herself with the truth of her answer. "Yes. Despite everything, or maybe, because of it, I am." William's enthusiastic welcome when they returned, combined with Mrs. Diaz's celebratory dinner, made the evening feel like the wedding reception they hadn't yet had. The ranch hands offered toasts and good-natured teasing, treating Rebecca as if she'd always been part of their community. Later, as she and Hank prepared for bed, Rebecca broached the subject that had been on her mind all day. "What about my homestead? Do we just abandon it now?" Hank considered this. "Not necessarily. It's good land and the location is valuable, but the house needs repair after the vandalism. I hate the thought of leaving it empty. Michael built that house with his own hands." Hank's expression softened. "What if we fix it up and offer it to Ramon and Lucia? They've been looking for a place of their own since they got married." Ramon was one of Hank's most trusted hands, recently married to Lucia, who helped Mrs. Diaz with laundry and cooking. They'd live there, take care of it. Rebecca asked hopefully, "And work that portion of the land. We could draw up a fair arrangement." Hank pulled her close. "That way, the house Michael built stays in caring hands and we expand the productive acreage of the ranch." Rebecca wrapped her arms around his waist, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "You're a good man, Hank Irwin." He kissed the top of her head. "Just trying to be worthy of the remarkable woman who agreed to be my wife." Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. The house on Rebecca's homestead was repaired, with Ramon and Lucia moving in once the work was completed. They were thrilled with the arrangement, and Rebecca found comfort in seeing the house lived in, cared for, smoke rising from the chimney each morning. William thrived in his new life, following Hank around the ranch, soaking up knowledge about cattle, horses, and the land. His nightmares about the vandalism gradually faded, replaced by excited chatter about his daily adventures. Barnes kept his distance, though Rebecca occasionally felt his cold stare when they went into town. The bank honored the original mortgage terms, and with Hank's careful management of their combined resources, the November payment no longer loomed as an impossibility. 6 weeks after their hasty civil ceremony, they held the celebration they'd originally planned. The ranch was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, a feast prepared under Mrs. Diaz's supervision. William proudly performed his role as ring bearer, carrying Hank's mother's ring on a small velvet cushion while Reverend Clark offered a blessing on their union. Even some of the townsfolk attended, their initial judgments softened by time and the obvious happiness of the couple. Mrs. Grayson brought a wedding cake. Mrs. Peterson grudgingly admired the simple but elegant dress Rebecca had sewn herself, and Sheriff Miller offered a somewhat sheepish congratulation. "You've proven a lot of people wrong, Rebecca," he admitted quietly during the celebration. "Including me." As the evening progressed and lanterns illuminated the ranch yard, Hank drew Rebecca aside, leading her to a quiet spot beneath an old cottonwood tree. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in silk. Rebecca unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of William on one side and on the other a lock of dark hair. "Is this yours?" she asked, touching the hair gently. Hank nodded. "An old tradition my mother taught me, the hair of those you love kept close to your heart." Rebecca felt tears well up. "It's beautiful, Hank, thank you." He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I know our beginning wasn't traditional, but I want you to know I would have chosen you in any circumstance, Rebecca. Not out of convenience or necessity, but because loving you feels like coming home after a long journey." Rebecca reached up to touch his face, her heart full. "I never expected to find love again. After James, I married Michael for security, for William's sake. I cared for him deeply, but it wasn't this, Hank prompted softly. "This feeling that my heart might burst from happiness, that I can face anything as long as you're beside me, that I'm not just surviving anymore, but truly living." Hank drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that still made her knees weak after weeks of marriage. When they parted, breathless, the sounds of celebration drifted from the ranch house music, laughter, the life they were building together. "Shall we return to our guests, Mrs. Irwin?" Hank asked, offering his arm. Rebecca slipped her hand through his elbow, the gold locket warm against her skin. "Let's go home." 5 years later, the spring sun warmed Rebecca's face as she sat on the porch of the main house, mending one of William's shirts. At 9, he was growing so fast she could barely keep up with the lengthening sleeves and pant legs. From her vantage point, she could see Hank in the corral, patiently teaching their 3-year-old daughter Catherine to sit on her first pony. The little girl's delighted squeals carried on the breeze as the gentle mare took a few careful steps with Hank holding both child and reins securely. William was visible beyond them, helping Ramon brand the spring calves, a responsibility he took very seriously as the ranch owner's son. Rebecca's hand rested briefly on her rounded belly, where their third child was making his or her presence known with vigorous kicks. 4 months to go before the family would welcome another member. So much had changed in 5 years. The Irwin Ranch had prospered, nearly doubling in size through careful management and strategic purchases of neighboring properties when they became available. They now employed 15 hands year-round, with more during busy seasons. Truth or consequences had changed too. The railroad had finally arrived 2 years ago, bringing new people and opportunities. The old prejudices had gradually faded as the town grew, though Rebecca and Hank rarely ventured into social gatherings beyond church and necessary business. Thomas Barnes had eventually sold his holdings and moved to California, his defeat in the battle over Rebecca's homestead apparently souring him on the territory. His departure had removed the last shadow from their happiness. Rebecca's reverie was interrupted by the approach of a wagon. She shaded her eyes, recognizing Mrs. Diaz returning from town with supplies. The older woman had become like family over the years, a beloved grandmother figure to William and Catherine. "Any news from town?" Rebecca asked as Mrs. Diaz climbed down from the wagon. "The usual gossip, Mrs." Diaz replied with a smile. "Though there is one interesting piece. Reverend Clark is retiring. The new minister arrives next month from Boston. Boston, that's quite a change," Mrs. Diaz nodded. "They say he's young with progressive ideas. His wife is a doctor, a female physician." Rebecca raised her eyebrows. "That will certainly stir things up." "Times are changing," Mrs. Diaz observed, helping Rebecca up from her chair. "Not always for the worse." Rebecca watched as Hank lifted Catherine from the pony, swinging her high in the air before setting her on his shoulders. William jogged over to join them, proudly showing his father something in his hand, likely a token from his work with the calves. "No," Rebecca agreed softly. not always for the worse at all. That evening, after the children were asleep, Rebecca and Hank sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him, their bodies fitting together with the easy familiarity of years together. William asked about going to school in Santa Fe next year, Hank mentioned. The boarding school Reverend Clark recommended, Rebecca sighed. He's growing up so fast, is he ready for that? I think he might be. He's smart, mature for his age. And it would give him opportunities we can't provide here. I'll miss him terribly, Rebecca admitted. But you're right, he deserves every chance. Hank's hand moved to cover hers. We could visit often, and he'd be home for holidays and summer. Rebecca nodded, accepting the inevitable passage of time. Catherine asked again about a little sister. Hank chuckled, his hand moving to Rebecca's rounded belly. What did you tell her? That we'll have to wait and see, though I think it's a boy this time. As long as the baby's healthy, I don't mind either way, Hank said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I wouldn't mind another daughter with your smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the stable, the rustle of wind through cottonwood leaves. Do you ever regret it? Rebecca asked suddenly. Marrying me when you did, taking on William, fighting Barnes and the bank. Hank turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. Regret, not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? Rebecca shrugged slightly. Just thinking about how quickly everything happened. We barely knew each other when we married. And now, Hank prompted. Rebecca smiled, leaning up to kiss him softly. Now I know that marrying you was the wisest decision I ever made. Hank's arm tightened around her. I remember what I told you that night on the porch before we married. Let them talk, you're mine now, I remember. What I didn't say then, what I maybe didn't fully understand yet, was that I was yours too, completely. That hasn't changed, Rebecca. If anything, it's only grown stronger. Rebecca nestled closer to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. From unlikely beginnings, a widow shunned for remarrying, a solitary rancher determined to help, they had built something precious. A family, a home, a love that had only deepened with each passing season. The baby's kicking, she murmured, guiding his hand to the spot. Hank's face lit with wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Strong like his mother, or her father, Rebecca countered with a smile. As the night deepened around them, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, Rebecca thought about the long journey that had brought them here. The grief and loss, the struggle and fear, had all led somehow to this perfect moment of contentment. The town that had once shunned her now respectfully called her Mrs. Irwin. The land that had almost been taken from her now flourished under their joint care. And the heart that had been twice broken had healed stronger than before, capable of a love deeper and more enduring than she had ever imagined possible. I love you, Hank Irwin, she whispered. His answer was in the tender kiss he placed on her lips, in the protective arm around her shoulders, in the life they had built together against all odds, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage to defy expectations. Let them talk, indeed.